We're in Way Media.
Hello, Twisted Humans. Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cult, or haunting? Then this is the podcast for you. I'm Alicia. And I'm Sierra, and this is Twisted and Uncorked. Okay. Hello, Twisted Humans, and welcome to a very special bonus episode. In light of our recent coverage of John Wayne Gacy, the opportunity to talk to somebody close to the case came up in a very serendipitous way. In fact, today's guest is a friend of ours, Bill Kimberlin, and he actually directed her our way, and she reached out right before we decided to cover him, so it was kind of perfect timing. And this is going to be our part 3. So today we are joined by Karen Conti. She has been a lawyer for over 35 years. Is that right?
37, but I started when I was 3.
Wow. Exactly. There you go. So we just have a couple of questions for you, obviously, about your involvement in the John Wayne Gacy case. But it sounds like you've had a pretty full career, and we are very excited to talk to you today.
Well, it's great to be here.
So my first question for you is, like I said, you've been in law for 37 years now. You have your own firm in Chicago, which is incredible. Are you able to tell us a little bit about why you decided to get into law? What interested you in that area? You started when you were 3, like you said.
That's right. Well, I grew up in the 60s, and, that was back when we looked up to our politicians a little bit more maybe than we do today.
Mhm.
And I was brought up with the John Kennedys and those types of people. And
Wow.
I thought to myself, I think I want to run for office one day. And the best way to do that is maybe be a lawyer first. I also think I was a middle child. And if any of your listeners are middle children, you know that you really get treated grossly unfairly because the youngest gets baby, the oldest gets more privileges, and you're stuck right in the middle. So I was always that one making the argument, trying to get my parents to be fair with me. And I think that combination led me to the law.
Oh, that's interesting.
That is amazing. I am also a middle child, and my mom used to tell me, you should be a lawyer with how much you argue your points. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm smart enough for all that.
That's amazing, though. And, your career has taken a couple of very interesting directions, hence why you're here today. You were on the final defense team of John Wayne Gacy during his final set of appeals, if I read that correctly. We would love to know about that experience for you and what that process kind of looked like.
Well, as your listeners know from your prior episodes about Gacy, Gacy was committing these horrific crimes back in the 70s. And he was finally apprehended and arrested in 1978, tried, convicted, and was sentenced to death. Well, I was just a kid then. I was in high school. And so, when you grow up in the Chicago area, I mean, he was the boogeyman growing up. He was what your mother pointed to as the guy whose car you don't want to get into, right? And I'm not even sure I understood what all he was doing. I think it was a more innocent time back then. So anyway, I go to college, then law school, and I've been a lawyer for only 5 or 6 years. And I hear on the radio that he was going to be executed. And we in Illinois were not executing people on death row very much in the 70s and 80s. And so I was very surprised that there was going to be this execution, even though if there's somebody who deserves an execution, it would probably be a John Wayne Gacy. So I turned to my law partner and said, well, God, wouldn't that be weird if we represented him? And we laughed it off. And a few days later, we got the call to come down and visit him, to represent him in, strangely, some civil litigation that he was involved in. The prison had sued Gacy for room and board. Basically, our law says that if a defendant can afford his incarceration, then he has to pay that money to the state. And it's rarely used, but no one like John Gacy, they wanted to take his life and his money. And so he wanted to fight it. And I thought to myself, hey, dude, you're getting ready to be executed. What are you even talking about money for?
Yeah.
But I was curious, and that's why I wanted to go down there. I didn't have any plans of doing anything other than meeting the face of evil. And, and it was a wild experience because we were all, I mean, I was a serial killer reader. I read all about, Jack the Ripper and Lizzie Borden and Ted Bundy, and I read all those books. And so I knew about the sociopathic personality, and I just wanted to see what that was like. And we met him, and at that point I decided I really want to represent him in the death row matters, because I've always been against the death penalty. And even for someone like Gacy, I thought it was something to do that was very important to stand up against the death penalty.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more on that front. It's sometimes a controversial opinion, and we do get comments and stuff, and it's like, well, too much can go wrong in terms of the death penalty. Like, if somebody is convicted and tried and found guilty, but they're not actually guilty, like, you're taking away an innocent life at that point. And secondly, it's like an eye for an eye. Is that really what we want to represent? But I would love to know your opinions on why you are against the death penalty, if you're comfortable sharing that.
Yeah, and I just want to preface this by saying everyone has strong opinions on this issue. And I don't mean to be pedantic and to tell you that this is the right way to look at things, because I think everyone should make up their own decisions. But
Absolutely.
the facts are really kind of gruesome sometimes. In Illinois, for instance, after Gacy was executed, we had 12 men walk off of death row due to actual innocence, not technical arguments, actual innocence.
Wow.
And at the same time, we had 12 men executed. So we were batting 12 for 12 here. I mean, this was like, our governor was a Republican conservative who was always in favor of the death penalty, said, I'm not doing this anymore, and put a moratorium, which led to the abolition in Illinois. So that's just an example of how we get it wrong. And people say, well, how do we get it wrong? We've got a good system. We do. We have a really good system, probably the best in the world. But when you have these facts that are death penalty eligible, multiple murders, children, torture, rape, you have all these horrific facts, I do believe that jurors look at that person in the defendant chair. And although you're supposed to presume him innocent, and I think jurors try to do that, it's hard when the facts are so horrific that mistakes are made all the time. It's inflicted so much more against Black and brown people. I think interestingly, and it doesn't deter, if it deterred, maybe I could get on board with it. If it would save lives, maybe I could say that would justify a saving of lives, but it just doesn't. And you look at the states that have the most executions, they have the most murders going on. And it costs more to use the death penalty. And I know that doesn't sound correct, but look it up. Anywhere you look, states save money when they abolish the death penalty because they have to pay prosecutors, they have to pay experts, they have to pay defense lawyers. The process itself is expensive. Incarcerating them in their own death row area is expensive. So, and I guess finally, I want to say I travel a lot. I've been to 50 different countries, and people are amazed. We're the only Western civilized country that has the death penalty, and everyone else has abolished it if they've ever used it. So all of those things lead me to a conclusion that we just don't need it. It's not doing anything, and it's harming people that shouldn't be harmed.
That was beautifully put.
Yes. Before we move on from that, right before we started talking about the death penalty, you said you were interested in seeing how, the face of evil, how John Wayne Gacy would be in person. When you did finally meet him, what was your impression? What did you think?
Well, he's not going to have evil written on his face, right?
Right.
Like, you still have some thought that there's going to be a tell, that I'm going to be able to see that evil part of him, right? And I just couldn't, and I didn't. And I didn't really see it during the entire time I represented him. And I spent over 50 hours with him and talked to him almost every day on the phone when I wasn't visiting him. So that's why he got away with it. He was so normal. He was engaging. He was charming. He was funny, and there was just nothing about him that stood out. And, if you look at Gacy's life, I mean, here was a guy who was very successful in his construction business. He had couple wives, and he raised children. He went to church every Sunday. He volunteered in hospitals. He mowed the lawn for his neighbors. I mean, this was a guy who in his life, his normal life, was a good guy. But then he would go out on these evenings and do the most inhumane acts that we can't even imagine. So it was this weird compartmentalization of the good and the evil. And when I was dealing with him, I wasn't seeing any of that evil.
That is terrifying. That's probably why I don't have any friends.
Well, it is terrifying because if I was getting that part of Gacy, that was the normal part. Like, who else am I dealing with in my life,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
My
yeah.
coworkers,
Right.
my
It could be
mailman.
anyone.
It could be anybody, right?
Oh,
Hiding in plain sight.
I mean, like from a serial killer perspective, like that charm and that superficiality that they're able to put out into the world is how they're able to do, like commit the
right.
acts that they do. So it's crazy
Yeah,
that you kind of saw that
they
mask
mimic.
almost.
They mimic what they know they should do. And when
Mm-hmm.
you're onto it, when you're aware of it, you can kind of see it. You can
Yeah,
watch it.
exactly.
And Gacy, like most antisocial personalities, considered everybody in his realm a pawn. Everybody was there to do something that helped him, in his
Mm-hmm.
view. So when you knew that, you watched it happen. So for instance, he would gather information from you. He thought he was being charming and asking about yourself and, well, tell me where you grew up. But what he was doing was getting ammunition to use later to either put pressure on me or to put guilt on me to do something that he wanted me to do. So it was really interesting to watch once you knew that's what his MO was.
Wow. I mean, good for you for, I mean, being able to face that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, be able to combat it and kind of do your job. Like, no, I'm not here to be used. I'm here to do a job, and I'm kind of seeing right through that kind of thing.
Well, and the beauty of knowing that is you can do it right back to them, which
Exactly.
which you can, and Gacy was always the smartest guy in the room. He was kind of a bragger, he and if you got on that side of him, because he was oppositional in a lot of ways, and I was able to turn it, John, that was, this is a great idea that you came up with, and then he would go, oh yeah, it was a great idea. And so, so there was a lot of that back and forth mind games.
Wow, that's crazy. Now, being on the defense side and knowing everything that he had done, obviously you face a bit of challenge in being able to do your job. Like what kind of strategy on a defense side do you have to come up with, or like how did you go about that? Like that must have been really
Sure.
difficult.
Well, it actually isn't, and it's kind of strange for people to hear this, but I represent bad people all the time. I represent people who have, beaten their wives and embezzled money from their church. And I've represented companies who poison the water. So I mean, I don't. I take everything exactly the same way. I look at the facts. I figure out the best strategy to try to get that person or that company best outcome possible, which could mean life in prison,
Mm-hmm.
or paying $10 million,
Mm-hmm.
But I don't do justice. I just do my little part. My part works because everybody else in the system is doing their part. So it is not difficult to represent. The backlash is hard, public
Yeah.
backlash, and knowing that you're going to lose
Yeah.
is hard. But
Yeah.
representing he wasn't the least likable client I ever had. But the
Wow.
strategy was really to save his life. Gacy did not want to leave prison. He told me that. And it was really attacking mostly the methods of execution. And in
Mm-hmm.
Illinois, we had the lethal injection machine, which was invented by a Holocaust revisionist who doesn't believe that the Holocaust happened. And he used Nazi research to devise this set of equipment, which is
Wow.
against treaty. And so we had all these arguments. A lot of them were academic in nature. But what I do want to tell you is when you do death penalty work like this, you're advocating for your client. Of course, you're trying to save his life, but you're also advocating for all the other defendants on death row who may have actual innocence defenses or racism or incompetent counsel or those really good defenses that a lot of them do have. So we were sort of like the PR person for the death penalty. Unfortunately, when you have a client like Gacy, nobody really listens to you the same way because everyone goes, all right, I don't really believe in the death penalty, but we're going to make the Gacy exception. So that was difficult.
Do you think that there was pressure from like for the state to implement the death penalty in his case because of the volume of his crimes? Like,
Oh, Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, people made their careers. So I can say my career was boosted by being associated with Gacy, but that's another story. No, the prosecutor went on to have a very, very lucrative career, and he became a judge. And I think that, when you have the people like Gacy and you're putting this guy away, you look like a hero. And that I get that. I totally get that. And the prosecutor, who was a friend of mine until he died a few months ago, was a good guy. He made his career on prosecuting the most prolific serial killer at the time.
Yeah.
And I do think the judges didn't want to rule in our favor on anything because a lot of them are elected,
Yeah.
and they'd probably be unsafe if they overturned a conviction or did something that stopped the
Yeah.
execution. So again, we were dealing with a lot of public pressure because bad facts make bad law, is how I say it.
Yeah, and I know much like the Bundy execution, people were partying in the parking lot that day after his, right? So you
Yeah, we
mentioned
had.
a little bit of public pressure. One of the things that came up in our research was that the defense, like some of the defense team received death threats and like their family was threatened and like things got pretty ugly for them having defended Gacy. Did you run into any of that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had death threats. A lot of them were directed at me, probably one because I was the more vocal person in the press. And I think that also because I was Gacy's only female attorney. And in my book, Killing Time with John Wayne Gacy, which just came out a couple months ago, I talk a lot about that, how I was treated very differently. And I think that when people see a woman doing a man's job in a man's world, that sometimes they feel the need to knock you down and to
Hmm.
intimidate you. And some of it became very sexual and very twisted. And so it was bizarre. And we had a bomb threat in my building, so that evacuated
Oh.
half the tall bank building. I still get stuff. I still watch my back because I think that the Gacy's of the world bring out people who, maybe been damaged themselves, maybe been sexually abused themselves. They're angry, and that anger goes on me. I
Mhm.
get it. I understand that, but it's something that you just have to be careful about.
Yeah. And like you said, you already had a fascination with true crime having gotten into the industry. Like, as a woman, you do just have to be alert at all times anyway, and especially having been involved in such a high profile case. I'm sorry that
Right.
you had to go through that, but it seems like you're able to combat it really well and with your head held high, which is amazing.
Yeah, and that's another part of my book that I think that one of the messages that I have about this thing, and that's why I wrote it, because I had the perspective of looking back over 30 years and saying that was me doing that back then, and like,
Mhm.
how did that affect me and how did that change me? And I really do believe that we all have that pivotal point in our life where something happens that may not be good. Maybe you're fired from a job, maybe you have a death in the family, and you can either become bitter and sad and retreat from the world, or you can become more resilient and more confident and move on. And I think I did the latter. I think I took that experience, that difficult experience, and I became bolder. And we as women, sometimes when we're young, we're not as confident as maybe we should be. And it really changed the way I practice law, changed the way I treated other people, and I allowed people to treat me. And it was actually a very, very good experience in the long run.
That's amazing. You kind of already answered my next question while we were talking about your book there. We're both very excited to read it. Can you tell us anything more about like what you unlocked in kind of that process without giving too much away? Because obviously we want our listeners to read it.
Sure. And yeah, I hesitated to write this book because when the execution happened, I wanted to get away from it. I mean, I had 7 months of just solid doing, working for Gacy. We basically put everything aside. It was probably $250,000 of legal fees that we donated
Wow.
to the cause. And so and we got a lot of, like I said, backlash. So I wanted to get away from it. I wasn't ever going to handle a death penalty case again. I had vowed never to even come close to doing one of those cases. So I didn't want to just write the book and then, so I'm glad I did, because like I said, I look back now on how that changed me. And I talk in the book a lot about meeting Gacy, about spending time with him, about getting into his head. I made some friendships with his family members, so that allowed me to kind of know a little bit more about his background than I knew before. And of course, I'm speculating, but like what made him be who he was? That was a fascinating aspect of my relationship with him, because I just don't believe people are born evil. I just don't believe that. I mean, they may have some sort of organic problem that gets exacerbated in their environment, but I will tell you, I just strained to talk to Gacy about it, about how his dad treated him, about the fact that he was sexually abused, and he was hard to get to because he was not very self-aware, and he was pretty much in denial about what he had become. So I talk a lot about that. I talk about him being a clown. I talk about his sense of humor and how he used that to defray and deflect some of his darkness. I talk about how I was treated differently as a woman throughout my career. I take some side stories about how I argued before the U.S. Supreme Court and was treated differently by Sandra Day O'Connor, which is kind of an interesting story. And, we just talk, I also talk about the appeals a little bit. I don't, go into gross detail about the legalities, but I also talk about things like the victims. That's not my story to tell, but I've represented victims in the past. And I talk about how I represented a little girl who was sexually abused and the prosecutors refused to prosecute. And so I was hired by the family to get the prosecutors to do that. So the idea being that we take on, as I said before, we take on different causes, different sides of the same equation, and we zealously advocate for our clients. So I kind of try to explain, the answer to your question before was, how could you do that when you know he's so guilty, kind of thing. It's just what we do.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the book has all those different aspects in it.
We can't wait to read it. And honestly, I wish that, it had come onto my radar before we recorded our episodes for this coverage, but I am very excited, and we'll definitely touch on it on a future episode.
Great.
And like having your own firm at this point, like you're a founding member, right? Did I read that correct?
Yes.
Do you have any other notable cases that you're really proud of that you've been able to represent over the years that have stood out to you?
Yeah, there's, and I talk about this in my book. I talk about several of them. Arguing before the United States Supreme Court was really interesting, and wow, it was, amazing. Oh, okay, what could I say? I had two young men who were accused of being drug cartel, and they were really just migrant farm workers coming from Mexico to drive. They usually drove grapes and different things, and they just so happened to drive marijuana, and they wanted to put them in jail forever. So we went down to rural Mexico, right below Texas, and took a day in the life of their family. And they had like 13 people living in a corrugated metal shack, sleeping in shifts because they were so poor. And we took that video and we brought it to the press, and we brought it to the prosecutors, and we got them out of jail with time served. I have stories like that I talk about that are good endings to stories. And I represented a woman who was battered at the workplace, and we went to the Illinois Supreme Court and got a reversal of the law. And I'm very proud of that because it's case precedent in Illinois for the last 30 years. So a variety of things I'm very proud of.
Wow. That's very admirable. And
Yes.
as women ourselves, we face challenges every day, but nothing like what you've faced in your career. So I just think that everything that you've done is very admirable that I'm aware of.
Thank
Again,
you.
I can't wait to read the book.
It's really, it's a privilege to be a lawyer because I can help people, who can't help themselves, whether it's because the law is complicated, whether it's because the system is against them. Legal fees are so crazy expensive. I've always quoted whoever said it, the people who need legal services the most can afford them the least. And so I've done a lot of free work for people who need it. And I feel like that's such a privilege to be able to help people on that level.
It's amazing. Yeah, Sierra touched on that a little bit in her coverage of O.J. Simpson. It's like his legal team was incredible. Like that should be the standard for all criminals, whether you did it or you didn't. Like not getting the possibly free attorney that's fresh out of law school and doesn't have the experience that you might need to win a case if it's
my cousin
comes
Vinny,
to
right?
life or death. Yeah.
And that's a really good point, because after OJ, everyone's like, well, he got these hotshot, expensive lawyers. That's why he
Mhm.
got off. Hey, think of the opposite. You get the My Cousin Vinny's and you go to jail, and
Yeah.
maybe you didn't do it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
there's two sides of that coin.
Yeah, so you're right. The people that need it the most are often the people that can't afford it. So
Correct.
I think it's
Yeah.
amazing that you're able to do a little bit of free work and help people in that way. That's very admirable. And we touched on how we came to meet Bill Kimberlin, author of Watch Me Die. Now I'm curious, how did you and Bill become friends?
You know what? I'm not even sure. I think that I was on a podcast that he was on, and someone said, you should talk to Bill. You and Bill have a lot in common. And then I Googled him, and I saw that he did all these speaking engagements where he talks about serial
Yeah.
killers and death row and all of that. And so we've kind of hooked up and done mutual networking. So he's a great guy.
He is. He was honestly, that's one of our most downloaded episodes of all time. Like people are just fascinated by what he does and how
Yes.
he can, I guess, make friends with people in situations where that wouldn't be the person you would want to befriend, but it might mean necessary information to a case. It might mean a little bit of healing from them before their execution. Like yeah. So I think that's a very cool friendship. When you
Yeah.
reached out, I was like, no way.
Yeah. And to that point, and I think Bill would probably concur that, I know this is hard to say because you think of John Gacy and you think of him as a non-human, okay? And what he did was not human, right?
Yeah.
That human beings do not do what he did.
No.
But there was humanity. There's humanity in everybody.
Yeah.
And I will tell you this, even if you're in favor of the death penalty, when you get to know somebody and you deal with them and you talk to them and you joke with them and you eat lunch with them, it just doesn't sit right with you that someone's going to execute them. It just
Yeah.
doesn't. People in my office at the time, they were like, Karen, why are you representing this guy? I don't want to talk to him. Ooh, I don't want to answer the phone. By the time the 7 months went by, when Gacy got ready to be executed, they were sobbing.
Yeah.
They were sobbing because they had formed a relationship with him, such as it was, on the telephone,
Yeah,
talking to a
there's a
serial killer.
complicated
It's
loss there
very
for you guys.
complicated.
Yeah. That's
Very.
that's a really good point as well, because you like even hearing his interviews, it's like, did you respect people at all? But I guess like he was able to build the relationships that he did and build the connections that he did that made it, oh my God, how could he have anything to do with this? The biggest scandal in Chicago. Like, yeah, that's insane.
I am remembering in our research and coverage, I think the episode that's not come out yet, towards the end, after he was arrested and going through appeals, at one point at least, and I don't know how long it stuck, he tried to deny and say that he was maybe covering it up for someone else. He didn't do it, but he covered it up. Did he ever say anything like that to you, or did he always take full blame for what he did?
Oh no. So he confessed to the police when he was caught
Mhm.
in
Right.
almost like photographic memory detail of who the kids were, where he buried them and under the crawl space. But then he stopped. Then he said, no, I never confessed. So he was a big liar. And when he got to me, he denied he did any of them except the first one. And he said that was self-defense.
Mhm.
Yes.
He
Yep.
alluded to that what you just said about he was covering up for other people. I will tell you this, and this is interesting, and I talk about this in my book. Gacy had two young men living with him when he was arrested. They were probably having sex with him. They were taking drugs. They were drinking with him, and they were the ones who buried the bodies because they testified to that at trial. There's no way that they didn't know what they were doing by digging those trenches. And there's no way that Gacy buried those boys down there himself. Just
Was
the
one of them
logistics.
Mike Rossi
Yes,
and Daniel Cram, I think is his
yes,
name? Yeah.
Graham. Yeah. One of them committed suicide
Oh my
after
God.
Gacy went to prison, and the other one is still alive. But another part of this, so I think they were co-conspirators. I think he
Mhm.
groomed them. I
Oh,
think he
absolutely.
threatened them. I think, and there was a victim who escaped who told the police that there was more than one person perpetrating the sex acts and the torture. So
Wow.
finally, I looked at his business records. He kept telling me to get his business records from the crime locker, and I did. And it showed that he was out of town on several occasions when the boys went missing that were found in the crawl space. Even if you fudge the dates a little bit, his records definitively showed that he probably did not kill these young men and boys. Not as to all of them, but just a few. Again, like if you kill one, you kill two, I get it.
Right.
But don't we want to know maybe if there were other perpetrators doing this?
Right.
I still don't know to this day who killed those kids.
That's a very crazy point, because yeah, you could say he's just trying to save his butt towards the end, knowing that he's going to be executed, but at the same time there could be some truth to that. And I know that he did use those two boys to help dig the graves and to help do certain things, and he even sold one of the victims' cars to one of them, like
Right.
and sadly in our research we came across the fact that he in some cases had other boys that worked for him digging holes and saying it was for drainage tiles and things like that under his house. Part of me wants to believe that they had no idea that that's what was coming to fruition for some of these boys that worked for him and people that came across him. But it's a good point. You never know at the end of the day how much some of these people knew, which is very
And
scary.
it's not as unusual as it sounds. There's a really good book out now called Serial Killer's Apprentice, and you guys should get the authors, Dr. Catherine Ramsland and Tracy Ullman, on your show, because it's about the Candyman, who's a serial killer.
Yes.
Which we are meaning to cover, so that will be great.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because he too had two young men
Mm-hmm.
who he used to procure and groom the boys. And it was easier for him. He would actually pay the kids to go out and find good-looking boys so he could torture them and kill them. And then the boys would dispose of the bodies. And so, you get these kids that are from backgrounds that are not so great. Maybe their parents are kind of not present in their lives. He gives them money. He gives them, some self-confidence. And then once they're implicated, now they're worried that he's going to do something bad to them.
Mhm.
So, or he threatens their family. So now they're caught up in being co-conspirators. So it's, although it sounds strange, I don't really think it's that strange.
No, and especially when it comes to life or death. Yeah.
When we were covering it, because I have talked about Dean Kroll before, and every time we come across something, I'm like, man, this sounds like that guy. Like they were very similar.
I think that's our sign for that to be our next coverage.
Well, and there are people who give the opinion that Gacy was watching Dean Kroll and it was emulating him because
Yeah.
he too had a torture board. He used, ropes
The
and
handcuffs. Yeah.
He had the two kids helping. I mean, there's so many parallels there.
Yeah.
It could be a coincidence, but maybe not.
Wow.
Interesting.
I mean, too, and you have to ask the question, like, how much of their action was done out of fear, too, like fear of being implicated and fear of the same thing happening to them. Did you ever get the chance to talk to those two boys? I'm assuming yes, but like, what was your opinion on that, like on their involvement? Do you think it was more out of fear?
I called one of them because, again, like I wasn't going for actual innocence, but I just thought if maybe Gacy could turn over somebody else who was guilty, maybe that could help him. I'm grasping at straws, right? So I called one of them. I'm not going to say the name because he's very litigious, I think, maybe.
Yes.
within, I'm not kidding you, 2 minutes, I get a call back from one of the highest profile lawyers in Chicago who used to be the prosecutor, the prosecutor in Chicago, prosecutor.
Wow.
And he said, if you call again, we're going to bring a lawsuit. Hung up the phone on me. So even all those years later, 15 years later at that time, he had a lawyer on retainer. And this was a kid who was making minimum wage. How did he afford that? Who was covering up? I mean, you have all these thoughts in your head.
Yeah.
And again, conspiracy theories are a lot of fun to talk about, but I'm not sure I believe any of them. But that was odd. That was just bizarre.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't have afforded that guy as my lawyer.
No, and that actually brings me to like an interesting point that's been a topic of discussion on our show. And just with Sierra and I as true crime podcasters, on the Canadian flip side of things, Robert Pickton was recently attacked in prison this past weekend. And he's been in prison for 22 years. Nothing has happened to him up until now. And there's a conspiracy going around that he was working with other people, possibly police officers, in his crimes, and was in the midst of writing a memoir while in prison, kind of selling out some of those names, and that's why he was attacked. Like, I think that it's very possible, but there's no way to know at the end of the day. Like, it's just
No, and I talk about, without saying, oh, I think this is what happened.
Yeah.
I brought some facts. Gacy said the word snuff film operation because I asked him, I said, what was, what the hell were those kids doing under your house, John, if you didn't kill them? I talked to him like that, and he'd say, like, snuff film operation. Well, for your young listeners who don't know what that is, these are films that are made of people extinguishing the lives of others, and there's supposedly a fan base that likes to watch that and find it, sexually arousing. I don't know if there's ever been a snuff film actually turned over somewhere, or maybe it's an urban legend, but it wouldn't surprise me that Gacy was making money on these crimes. When that young victim came out of the house and he escaped, he told the police not only was there another person perpetrating crimes, but that there was a light going on and off as if it was like a projector going on. And when
That's so
Gacy was
scary.
arrested, they brought out all this sophisticated, at the time, cameras and equipment that was never recovered by the family afterwards. So, that's not that wouldn't be surprising to me that he was doing some kind of film. And remember, in the 70s, I mean, even just being gay was not, approved of. People
Mhm.
were regularly, living a double life. And certainly there wasn't pornography like that we have it now. And so maybe there was some sort of market for that kind of really dark sexual content.
And it doesn't
Absolutely.
excuse, of course, any of the actions, but it sucks that because there is a market for things like that, those things then happen. Like, those people who are wanting it are also to blame.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Absolutely. It's confusing. The whole thing is confusing.
Yes.
And that, like, taboo nature of homosexuality at the time, I think, contributes to the fact that 5 of his victims still don't have names, like, which is really sad, and part of the reason why we chose to cover him, because we always hope that anything we put out there will lead to somebody knowing something or more information or somebody coming forward. But
It's true. And, I go back and I look at some of the news footage from the time he was arrested.
yeah,
And even back then they were saying, oh, these boys were all prostitutes. They were all runaways. No, they weren't.
No.
They weren't. I mean, some of them were married. Some of them, came from really good homes. Not that it matters. It doesn't matter. A life is a life. But I think that the police could easily have turned the other way with Gacy when kids would go, into his home to apply for a job and never seen again. Police would come knocking at the door, and Gacy would tell them a joke and they'd walk away. It could be that they thought, oh, he's doing a gay thing, and those kids were just, runaways. And I really don't think, like even the Gilgo Beach killer, very similar. He's picking on, sex workers, and you
people
can't
that
tell
are
me
seen
that
as less dead. Yeah,
they were, with female executives gone missing, that we wouldn't have found him sooner.
yeah,
Yep.
So these people really know how to pick victims who aren't going to be missed. Yeah.
With Dahmer, there was a victim literally standing in front of the police officer.
Remember
And
that?
like, oh no, that's
asking
my
for
boyfriend.
help. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
That's
I
crazy.
mean, not to say that the world has changed much, but I'm glad to know that, LGBTQ communities are being accepted more now,
More and more
maybe,
every day.
yeah, and
Hopefully
maybe
it
taken a little
continues.
bit more seriously. But it's really scary that people are able to take advantage of a system like that and wipe out 33 people before somebody starts looking. Like,
Right.
It's and even some of the families, it was thought that some of the families who may have suspected that Gacy killed their sons or brothers or whatever didn't come forward because they didn't want the stigma of their son being gay to be
Yeah.
made a public record, which is the saddest thing I've ever heard of.
Mhm.
I agree.
So
Part of our research was the John Wayne Gacy tapes, and I know that one of the investigators that was on the case that was part of the process in the 90s of trying to identify some of them with DNA records. Like I think that it's amazing that they, used funds to be able to pull this information and try and get some names out there. Like, what is your opinion on that? Like, do you think that they could have done more? Like, do you think they still can do more to get answers for these unidentified victims?
I think that our sheriff right now is doing a great job of trying to find these, to find out who these people were. One other thing I want to say, which Gacy was out of town a lot because he would do construction jobs in like Wisconsin and Florida in the Pacific Northwest, and because I saw his record,
Mm.
you can't tell me that he stopped his killing spree when he was up there, right?
True.
He's in different
Oof.
places where nobody knows who he is. Some of these places were much less populated than where he lived in the Chicago suburbs. And certainly it would have been easier for him to dispose of bodies. And I would love if some young sleuth could go to those places where we know he was and look at records to see if young men and boys went missing during that time, because my guess
Yeah.
is that someone could connect dots that Gacy is responsible for more victims than just 33.
Having
Wow,
those
that
job
is-
records, has other police stations ever requested that? Like knowing that he was maybe in that area, or has anyone
that I know
requested
of.
that information?
Nobody, no, I haven't heard that.
Wow, they should.
I didn't even know he was in different places. From our research, I don't think it was found very publicly. Do you know if it's public record? Like, is it something
Now,
that we could
yeah.
request now from Chicago?
I believe you can. They make it real difficult because those records, and I used to have them, and I don't have them anymore. I've looked all over all my storage places because we had them when we were making the argument that Gacy was out of town during certain ones of these murders. My guess is that the court records might have them because I believe we attached them to some of our appeals. It could be that Crime Locker still has them. And so, that would be a project to try to get those
course.
records. Yeah. And, remember, for your listeners, I mean, you probably have very young listeners, and, we didn't have the integrated database that we have now. So Gacy
Yeah.
served time in Iowa before his killing spree in
Yeah.
Chicago. And a lot of people, by the way, speculate that he killed young men and boys up there too. But he went to jail. He got a 10-year sentence. He served like 2 or so.
Yeah.
And then he comes
18
back to
months.
Chicago and starts killing. And so, the police didn't really connect that. Now, today, Gacy would have, been a sex offender and had to register. So
Right.
he probably wouldn't have gotten away with any of them in Chicago, or very few, not to mention cameras everywhere and cell phones and all the other forensics that we have now.
That's
But,
true. That's very
yeah.
true. And we've touched on that in other cases with like certain killers like Ted Bundy. Like he had records in 3 different states, but nobody ever connected the dots or talked to each other. Like, I mean, it's great that we have that technology now and that integration now so that it does make it harder for people to get away with mass murders like this. Like it's tragic, really.
And even if you think about it, we didn't know much about serial killers. I mean, we were just starting,
That
to
term
know
was
about
just,
serial killers.
yeah, I
So
think in the
even
80s.
if they had known, the police had known about Gacy's record, they might have just said, oh, okay, well, he had problems there. But now we know, kind of, once a pedophile, always a pedophile. You're not going to
Right.
stop that behavior.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stop because you go to jail. So, so it was just a different time that allowed that to happen.
Yeah, insane. And I mean, I know that like while he was in prison, there was an incident where he beat up another inmate for performing sexual acts on another inmate. Like he was very much struggling with his sexuality, it felt like during that time, and like a lot of anger was used to cope with that. And I think you're very right that it's possible that there was other victims in Iowa and no one just ever connected the dots. But it makes me wonder if he had been in prison for his full sentence of 10 years, like would some lives have been changed? Would that have turned out differently? Like it's hard.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I I don't think that by serving 10 years, he would have learned his lesson, because
No, gosh, no.
Gacy did not think what he did was wrong. There's just, he's not wired that way. But it could have delayed him from coming to Chicago and doing what he did.
Yeah.
And maybe our technology and our sophistication
just
would have been a
makes you
little bit
wonder.
different then. I don't know. It's hard to say that.
And from like a defense side, like you want to get the least amount of years, or like the best case scenario for your clients. Like, what is your opinion on people like John Wayne Gacy? And we've covered it in so many serial killers. Like, they'll have one small offense, not that sodomy is small, like he still sexually assaulted a young boy, but like releasing them again, you know that they're going to reoffend. Like, what is your opinion on that? Like, at that point, should they just stay where they are?
Yeah, a lot of people think that I'm going to say, oh no, they have a second chance. No, the John Gacy's of the world have to be locked up like an animal in a cage. They have to. I think there are some people, and I've represented people who have killed, spur of the moment, they're on drugs, they're 18 years old, they have a gun they shouldn't have. I'm not saying, I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying that they can be rehabilitated.
Yeah.
But a person like John Gacy, I think he would have gotten out of prison, and he would have, the second day he was out, he would have
gone right back to
reoffended.
it.
I don't think he had the ability to control those impulses.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's just it's frustrating because we see it so much. Like, the types that, like, how did they not see that was going to be a reoffense or a risk to society?
Yeah, or even just to get graphic is like, okay, I want to be outside in the real world. I want to eat good food. I want to do what I want to do. I want to travel to Florida. Or can I do, or do I just murder people and torture them? Like, is that really that important in your life that you can't just stop doing it?
Yeah,
it must be a compulsion beyond what we understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a degree in psychology, and I still can't begin to understand some of those actions and how people bring themselves to do it. Like, even just researching it is hard to an extent. Like, we'll spend 2-3 weeks researching and then recording, and then I edit it after that. And it's like, you've lived in that mental state for so long. You, as an attorney, likely deal with that for sometimes years. Like, do you have any coping mechanisms that you like to use for your own mental health, or things that, like, how do you keep yourself sane, so to speak?
I think that I use a sense of humor, and it may be offensive to some people, but
Yeah, I do
even
too.
with Gacy, I mean, Gacy, I would go at him. We would just like rib each other. And even in my office, the gallows humor. And it's not like you think what Gacy did was funny, because it's not. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's a way to cope with how difficult, the whole thing is from so many standpoints. And I do think that, like, for me, exercise is so key. Like, I get up in the morning really early, like before 5 o'clock, and I'm on the exercise bike, reading all my newspapers and doing all my stuff and returning my emails, because I know that's what I need to kind of literally sweat out that anxiety and pressure that I'm going to feel for the day.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, as we're recording this, listeners, it is May, it is Mental Health Awareness. So I was just curious, because sometimes it is hard. Good to take care of your mental health in the midst of cases like this that are just so trying to your.
Well, it's interesting too, as a lawyer, you have to care about your person, your client. You've got to care. But if you care too much, then you're just no good.
Yeah.
You become no good, not only for that client, for all your clients, and for yourself.
Yeah.
So it's a real thin line, because there are a lot of lawyers who don't care, and you can tell because they put in the minimal effort, charge their clients, and walk away and laugh. But it's just a fine balance.
Well, I think everything that you've said is very eloquent and well said, and we so appreciate your insights and everything that you're doing as a woman and as a lawyer and as an advocate for people out there, and continuing to tell your story. And
Thank you.
so thank you so much for everything that you've said today. Is there anything that you are currently working on? Any thing that you have in the works, anything exciting that you want to tell us about and our listeners about?
Well, I think they're going to make a docuseries of some type about my book, which I'm kind of excited
Yes,
because, of course, Angelina Jolie is going to play me. No, I'm just kidding.
absolutely.
So,
see it.
I can see it.
so that's exciting. You know, I live a nice life. I have a house up in Wisconsin. I come here 3 or 4 days a week and kind of get away from the city while I work. Like we're always working now remotely.
Yeah.
And I travel a lot, and I still practice a lot of law. I do a lot of legal analysis on national and local news. I've got a radio show on WGN. I teach. So I got a full life, and I also have another book in me that I'm dabbling with right now, and it's going to be a fiction.
That's so exciting.
Amazing.
Are you going to do it under your same name, or are you going to use like an alias if you're going fiction?
Maybe like John Grisham. How does that sound?
I just want to be able to keep my eyes out for it. Sierra and I are both very avid readers, so
Yes,
fiction
I
and
am too.
nonfiction. So
No, it'll be under my name. I'm sure.
that's so exciting. Oh, well, do you want to tell us and your listeners where everyone can find you and follow along on your work?
Sure. You know, best place to go, like Facebook, Karen Conti, KarenConti. I have a radio show on WGN. If you Google Radio Karen Conti, you can get all my podcasted segments where I talk about legal issues with great guests. My website is KarenConti.com, and you can sign up for new stuff. hello@KarenConti.com. And my book is called Killing Time with John Wayne Gacy, Defending America's Most Evil Serial Killer on Death Row. It's on Amazon, it's on Walmart and Books A Million. And please, if you read it and like it, give me a nice review and send me an email and tell me how you like it or what I said that was good or bad or indifferent. So I'd like hearing from people who read my book because, when you write a book, who cares about the money? You're not going to get rich doing that, but it's really just leaving a message for people. Like when I die, that will be my message. And I hope it resonates with people for the right reasons.
That's so incredible. I'm excited to read it. I ordered mine 2 days ago, so I'm hoping it'll be here any day. But I can't wait to read it and to see what else you do. We will link everything in our show notes so people can find all of the incredible work that you've been doing. And we just want to say thank you so much again for reaching out to us and for coming on our show. It really means a lot.
Alicia, thank you so much. And Sierra, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll let you get back to your Saturday.
All right.
We could talk to you
Lisa.
forever. Honestly, I think we had to cut it off with Bill because I think he had to go make dinner for his wife or something. I'm like, no. But we would love to talk to you again.
If you guys ever need someone I talk about Gilgo Beach because it was so similar to Gacy. Yes. A lot of parallels there. So if you ever need me to weigh in on something as a lawyer, just let me know, and I'm always willing to jump on it. I always, ready to put my war paint on and come on.
Your war paint, I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, we would love to have you on again. This was a lot of fun, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and happy Memorial Day. Woo!
Yeah,
thank you.
Enjoy your long weekend.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Twisted and Uncorked is a proud member of Weirding Way Media. Hosted and produced by Sierra Zorn and Alicia Watson. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you are listening now. It really is the best way to spread the word. You can check out all things Twisted on our website, twistedanduncorked.com, and we will see you next Tuesday for a brand new episode.